Let's take a moment and close our eyes to imagine two scenarios. Scenario 1. Millions of unborn children never get the chance to take their first breath. Decisions made quietly, privately, for various reasons. Scenario 2. Entire communities hunted, stripped of identity, and systematically destroyed. Hatred made industrial. Which one feels worse to you? At first, this question seems impossible, but by examining intention, context, and the meaning behind each act, we can begin to understand the moral complexity of these two tragedies. In this video, we'll explore the perspectives, frameworks, and reasoning that shape how we think about morality, life, and human suffering. Okay, let's back up for a moment. How did this comparison even come up? Well, you might have seen clips online, one that gained a lot of attention featuring political commentator Charlie Kirk debating college students. We want to note that any mention of Charlie Kirk in this video is for illustrative purposes only. We do not intend to speak negatively about him or cause harm. His name is used solely as an example in the context of the discussion. In his discussion, he compared abortion to the Holocaust and argued that, in terms of numbers, abortion is worse.
That's how we get Auschwitz. That's how we get the greatest horrors of the 20th century. Those people are unwanted.
So you're comparing abortion to the Holocaust?
Absolutely, I am. In fact, it's worse. It's worse.
It's really not. I don't
it's
think it
45 million babies. It's nearly 8 times worse than the Holocaust.
Statements like this are designed to grab attention, and they certainly do. But here's the thing, looking at numbers alone only scratches the surface. To truly understand this comparison, we need to consider intentions, context, and the human realities behind both scenarios. To help us do that, we'll explore it through different philosophical lenses, looking at consequences, rights, character, and even historical and legal perspectives. And step by step, this will help us see why the question is far more complex than it first appears. Before diving into moral frameworks, let's get a clearer picture of both scenarios with some numbers. First, let's talk about the Holocaust. Between 1941 and 1945, the Nazi regime carried out a systematic, state-sponsored campaign to exterminate Jews and other groups they deemed undesirable. Approximately 6 million were killed, along with millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, Polish and Soviet civilians, and political dissidents, bringing the total estimated deaths to between 11 and 17 million people, according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. This was industrialized, deliberate, and ideologically driven, an attempt to erase entire communities from history. But what about abortion? Using the United States as an example, in 2022 there were over 600,000 legal abortions reported to the CDC. That's roughly 11.2 abortions for every 1,000 women aged 15 to 44, or about 1 abortion for every 5 babies born alive, according to the CDC. Most of these decisions are personal or medical, shaped by circumstances like health risks, financial struggles, or trauma. Unlike the Holocaust, abortion is not part of a state-driven campaign. It's an individual choice within complex social and personal realities. Seeing these scenarios side by side makes clear why the comparison is challenging. One involves industrialized and deliberate cruelty. The other involves individual choices within complicated circumstances. Ethical frameworks, looking at consequences, rights, character, and historical context, help us think clearly about intention, morality, and human impact. To get to the heart of the question, which is worse, abortion or the Holocaust? We need to step into different philosophical lenses. And depending on the perspective, the answer can shift dramatically. Consequentialism focuses on outcomes, maximizing well-being and minimizing harm. The Holocaust killed around 6 million Jewish people, plus millions of others in just a few years. Abortion happens quietly, year after year. In the US alone, there were about 930,000 abortions in 2020 among women aged 15 to 44. Globally, the numbers reach tens of millions annually. From a purely numerical perspective, that scale can feel staggering. But consequentialism also considers long-term effects. The Holocaust tore apart cultures, destroyed communities, and left generational trauma. Abortion, while involving potential lives, often occurs because someone feels unable to raise a child at that moment. The consequences play out differently, one in mass suffering, the other in private decisions that ripple outward. Deontological or rights-based ethics examines duties and rights rather than outcomes. The Holocaust was a state-sponsored campaign of extermination, a direct denial of fundamental rights to life, dignity, and personhood. It's hard to imagine a greater violation of moral duty. Abortion raises a different rights question. Does a fetus have the same right to life as someone already born? And how does that right weigh against the rights of a 15-year-old girl? Because yes, abortions sometimes involve people that young to control her body and her future. Deontology doesn't provide easy answers. It just highlights how competing rights clash in painful ways. Virtue ethics isn't about numbers or laws. It's about character, intention, and compassion. The Holocaust was carried out with cruelty, hatred, and dehumanization, a complete breakdown of virtues like justice, kindness, and respect. Abortion, by contrast, is rarely about cruelty. It often stems from fear, survival, or difficult circumstances. Yet the fact that some decisions involve very young women highlights vulnerability. Virtue ethics asks, how should we respond as a society? With judgment or with compassion and support? Looking through these ethical lenses, the comparison becomes messy. The Holocaust was a concentrated, state-driven atrocity. Abortion is an ongoing, private, deeply personal issue tied to age, choice, and circumstance. They are different kinds of moral problems, but both force us to wrestle with life, rights, and our responsibilities as human beings. On the surface, it might seem like lining up the numbers, millions in the Holocaust, millions through abortion, could tell us which is worse. But morality isn't that simple. Context matters. Consider intent and agency. The Holocaust was a deliberate state project aimed at exterminating entire groups. Abortion is usually an individual choice, often made under fear, pressure, or hardship. Comparing those motives side by side already feels uneven. Coercion versus choice is another factor. Holocaust victims had no say. They were forced, rounded up, and murdered. Abortion, though tragic depending on your view, typically involves consent, even if that consent comes from someone very young or under difficult circumstances. Dehumanization is also distinct. The Holocaust was about erasing people's identities and turning neighbors against each other. Abortions debates ask a different question. When does a fetus count as a person? While both touch on human value, the type of dehumanization is not the same. Finally, historical uniqueness matters. The Holocaust holds a singular place in history because of its systematic, industrialized mass murder. Abortion is an ongoing global issue tied to medicine, law, and personal circumstances. Flattening them into a single comparison risks missing what makes each morally weighty. Whenever this comparison arises, people usually split into two camps, and their arguments reveal how they perceive morality. Some argue abortion is worse, focusing on the numbers. Worldwide, tens of millions of abortions happen every year, far more than the 6 million Jewish lives lost in the Holocaust. If you believe life begins at conception, each abortion represents a human life. Over decades, the scale looks staggering. Others argue the Holocaust is worse, focusing on intent and cruelty. The Holocaust involved systematic state-sponsored extermination, intensely brutal acts, gas chambers, forced labor, medical experiments, and propaganda. Abortion, while tragic, is not motivated by hatred or ideology. It is personal, private, and tied to circumstances. Often, these sides talk past each other because they use entirely different moral measuring sticks. One counts lives, the other weighs cruelty, hatred, and intent. Change the lens, and the conclusion changes too. The real weight of the question isn't about deciding which is worse. Comparing the Holocaust to abortion leads nowhere because suffering and tragedy cannot be measured on a single scale. What matters is that asking the question opens a space to reflect on how we see the world and define value. Do we measure wrong by the number of lives lost, the intentions behind actions, the suffering caused, or the way events reshaped history? Each lens gives a different answer. The point is this: the question isn't about which one is worse, it's about perspective. It challenges us to think about how we define morality, how we assign meaning to life, and how our view of history shapes what we consider right and wrong.